All right, what if I told you that one of the most brilliant minds who ever lived, someone whose ideas shaped medicine, philosophy, and science for literally millions of people, did his work over 1,000 years ago? Well, today we're diving into the story of that exact person.
Okay, let's kick things off with a little thought experiment. I want you to really imagine this. You just pop into existence. You're floating in a complete void. You can't see anything, can't hear anything, you can't even feel your own arms or legs, nothing. So the big question is, in that total sensory blackout, would you still know that you exist?
That is a seriously mind-bending question, right? It sounds like something straight out of The Matrix or some modern sci-fi movie. But here's the crazy part. The guy who came up with this lived over 1,000 years ago, in a world of candlelight and scrolls. So who was this person? Okay, so his name was Ibn Sina, but in the West, he's famously known as Avicenna. And listen, calling him a prodigy is a massive understatement. We're not talking about some boring, dusty figure from a history book. We're talking about a kid whose intelligence was, and I'm not exaggerating here, completely off the charts. Just look at this timeline. It's wild. By the time he was 10 years old, an age when most of us are maybe figuring out fractions, he had already memorized the entire Quran. By 16, he wasn't just studying medicine, he was teaching it to grown-up doctors. 1 year later, at 17, he's the personal doctor to a kin, and by the time he's 18, he's pretty much mastered all the known Greek sciences. It's just unbelievable. And if you want a sense of his confidence, get this. He once just casually said that medicine is, and I'm quoting here, not one of the difficult sciences. Can you even imagine that? It just gives you a little peek into the raw processing power of his brain. I mean, what takes other people a whole lifetime to learn was basically a side hobby for him. But here's the thing. Avicenna's life wasn't all quiet nights in a library. Not at all. His genius basically catapulted him into the super high-stakes world of medieval politics. And in that world, being the smartest guy in the room could either land you the best job or land you in a prison cell. So he was constantly on the move, bouncing from one city to another, serving as a doctor and a top political advisor, a vizier, for different rulers. But being that important, well, it puts a target on your back. He got tangled up in these nasty political feuds, had to deal with mutinous soldiers, and eventually he was forced to go into hiding just to stay alive. And yeah, at one point, his luck just ran out. He was found, captured, and thrown in prison. But this is where the story gets even crazier. While he was on the run, hiding, with zero access to his library, no books at all, he wrote huge chunks of his philosophical masterpiece entirely from memory. Let that sink in. A massive, super complex encyclopedia of science and philosophy, all written down without a single reference book to check. Just, wow. It's almost impossible to believe.
So out of the hundreds of things this guy wrote, there are two books that really stand out. And when I say stand out, I mean they were absolute game changers that literally shaped how people thought for centuries. Okay, so first up, you've got the Canon of Medicine. This thing was a beast, a 14-volume encyclopedia covering everything you could possibly know about medicine at the time. It was so ahead of its time, it even talked about diseases spreading through invisible tainted organisms. Basically, he was describing germs hundreds of years before we had microscopes to see them. Then you have the Book of Healing. This was even bigger, 22 volumes. But it wasn't about the body. Its whole goal was to, as he put it, heal the ignorance of the soul using logic, science, and philosophy.
And the impact of these books? Absolutely staggering. The Canon of Medicine was the medical textbook, not just for a few years, but for over 700 years. Think about that. In both the Islamic world and in Europe, this was the book doctors learned from. We're talking well into the 1700s. That's an insane shelf life for a science book. Now, inside the Book of Healing, he dropped one of the most famous philosophical arguments ever, called the proof of the truthful. Let's break it down. It's pretty cool. Step 1. He says everything that exists is either contingent, it depends on something else to exist, like you depend on your parents, or it's necessary. It just has to exist, all on its own. Step 2. You can't have an infinite chain of contingent things. It's like an endless line of dominoes falling, but with no first domino to ever start the chain reaction. It just doesn't work. So, step 3, there must be a first cause, something that started everything but wasn't caused by anything else, a single necessary existent. And for Avicenna, that was God. So you might be thinking, okay, cool story, but why are we talking about some guy from the 11th century? Well, because his ideas aren't just history. They're actually woven into the foundation of our modern world in some really surprising ways.
I mean, for starters, his philosophy had a huge influence on major European thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. In physics, he came up with a theory of motion that an object will stay in motion unless something stops it.
Sound familiar?
Yeah, that's basically Newton's first law, but Avicenna wrote it down 600 years before Newton. And remember that floating man idea from the beginning? Philosophers are still debating it today when they talk about consciousness. His legacy is so alive that he's honored with statues, universities named after him, and even a UNESCO prize.
You know, Avicenna only lived to be 57. By today's standards, that's a pretty short life. But a quote that's often attributed to him just sums everything up perfectly. I prefer a short life with width to a narrow one with length. And man, was his life wide. He packed more discovery, more adventure, and more influence into those 57 years than most people could manage in 10 lifetimes. And all of this leaves us with one last big question to think about. Avicenna was a true polymath. He basically mastered all of human knowledge available at the time, from east to west. But today, we live in this hyper-specialized world, right? Where scientists and scholars focus on one tiny little sliver of one field. So my question to you is, could a mind like his, with that kind of insane breadth and genius, even exist today? What do you think?